You know, in a crisis, every single word matters. But up in the sky, two little phrases can mean the difference between, say, a serious problem and an absolute disaster. Today, we're going to break down the critical language of aviation emergencies, Mayday, and Pan, all through the story of one flight where a single call set off a really dangerous chain reaction.
So, this was the big question on the mind of pretty much any pilot listening to the radio traffic from Lufthansa Flight 405. The crew was up against a serious problem, and the decision they were about to make, the very words they chose, well, they were about to have consequences they couldn't even begin to imagine.
All right, so our story kicks off high above one of the busiest airports in the world, just moments after takeoff. On May 13th, you've got Flight 405, a big four-engine Airbus A340, climbing out of New York, headed for Germany. For the passengers, it was just the start of a totally routine transatlantic flight. But up in the cockpit, things were about to get very, very complicated. And boom, the first issue hits, an engine failure. Now here's the thing, on a four-engine plane, losing one engine isn't a total catastrophe. This aircraft is designed to fly perfectly safely on three, but it's still a serious situation. They can't just keep going to Frankfurt. They have to land. The real question is where, when, and how do they let air traffic control know what's going on? After a bit of back and forth, the call finally goes out. But it's not a declaration of emergency. It's pan. As pilot and analyst Captain Steve put it, this was a very casual approach to a pretty significant problem, and it signaled a level of urgency that, well, it didn't quite seem to match the potential danger. And that, right there, brings us to the heart of this whole explainer. What is the real difference between these two calls? Why would you pick one over the other? To really get inside the crew's decision-making, first, we have to understand the language they were speaking. So to really appreciate the weight of their choice, we've got to break down these two crucial terms. I mean, they are the absolute foundation of emergency communication, not just in the air, but at sea, too. Okay, so here's the bottom line. Mayday is for when you are in grave and imminent danger that threatens human life. Think fire, loss of control, a situation that requires immediate help just to survive. Pan, on the other hand, it signals an urgent situation, something that needs attention, but it isn't immediately life-threatening. A mechanical issue, maybe a medical problem. It needs help, for sure, but it's a step below a full-blown five-alarm catastrophe. And the story behind Mayday is actually pretty fascinating. It has nothing to do with the month of May. It's basically an English-friendly version of the French phrase Mayday, which just means help me. It was chosen back in the 1920s, which was brilliant because it was super easy for both English and French pilots flying across the channel to understand. It just cuts right through the static and any language barriers. And the procedure itself? It's just as clear. You say Mayday 3 times, and that's not for dramatic effect, right? It's to make sure it gets heard over a busy, crackly radio frequency. Then you give your call sign, you say what's wrong, where you are, and what you're going to do next. The whole structure is designed for absolute clarity in the middle of chaos. Now this is the key difference in the real world. A Mayday call clears the air. All other radio chatter just stops. The frequency belongs to that one aircraft in distress, and air traffic control gives them absolute priority. A pan call, it signals urgency, yeah, but it doesn't guarantee you that same undivided attention. And for Lufthansa 405, well, that distinction was about to matter a whole lot. Okay, so armed with that knowledge, let's get back to Flight 405. They've called Pan for their engine failure, and now they've got to figure out what to do next. And this is pretty astonishing. For a full 15 minutes after that engine failed, the plane just kept flying in the wrong direction, out over the Atlantic Ocean. The crew was busy on the radio with their dispatch back in Germany, trying to figure out if they should divert to Boston or head back to JFK. So think about it. That 15-minute flight out meant another 15 minutes just to get back to where they started. That's a 30-minute round-trip delay. 30 precious minutes spent flying away from safety, all while dealing with a serious problem. And this lost time, it would turn out to be the trigger for everything that came next. So let's just trace this chain reaction. It all kicks off with the engine failure, but look what happens next. That indecision creates a 30 to 40-minute delay. Because of that delay, the plane is still way too heavy with fuel, so now it has to circle around and dump it, spending even more time up in the air. And it was during that extra, totally unnecessary time flying around that a second, completely unrelated problem started to develop.
They are literally seconds from touchdown at JFK when the crew comes on the radio with some pretty chilling news. We have another technical problem. This time, it's a hydraulic failure. The situation just went from bad to worse right at the most critical moment of the entire flight. Because of this new failure, they can't land. They have to abort the approach and perform what's called a go-around. Basically, they have to power up and climb away from the runway to circle back for another shot. But this isn't some textbook go-around. They're doing it with one engine already out. It's an incredibly demanding maneuver that pilots practice over and over in simulators, hoping they never, ever have to do it in a real plane full of people.
So, just picture this. The aircraft is now back in the air, climbing away from the runway it was seconds from touching. The crew is now wrestling with two separate, serious failures and has to get everything set up for another attempt to land.
After working through the hydraulic issue, the crew just skillfully manages the whole situation. They get the plane configured, they line up with the runway for a second time, and with emergency vehicles waiting on the ground, Lufthansa 405 finally touches down safely at JFK. A successful outcome, right? But here's the real question. Was it a success because of their decisions, or was it a success in spite of them? Captain Steve calls it the trifecta of probably bad decisions that ended up having a good outcome. They landed safely, sure, but the journey to get to that landing was way more dangerous than it ever needed to be. And here it is. This is the most crucial takeaway from this entire incident. The hydraulic failure and that super risky go-around, they weren't just random bad luck. They were a direct result of that extra 30 to 40 minutes the plane spent flying in the wrong direction. If they had declared an emergency and turned back right away, they would have been on the ground long before that second failure ever had a chance to happen. These were, for all intents and purposes, self-induced problems. And that's really the powerful lesson from this flight. The initial problem, the engine failure, was totally manageable, but the hesitation, the failure to act decisively and communicate with maximum urgency, that created a cascade of new and frankly much more dangerous problems. So it leaves us with one last question to think about, and it applies to way more than just flying a plane. In any high-stakes situation, what truly poses the biggest threat? Is it the challenge you're actually facing, or is it the secondary crises that are born from your own delay and your own indecision?